How y'all doing? Hope y'all are doing good. Uh, hope y'all are having a good day, a good morning. This morning for our devotion, we're gonna do something a little different, but we'll get into that in a little bit. I want to take this time to remind you guys that we'll be doing our surviving quarantine check-in today at 4 p.m. Um, we'll be doing that at 4 p.m. today. We'll do it via Zoom. I'll make sure to post the links on Instagram, Facebook, all of that. The link for the meeting on Instagram will be in the bio, so that way you can just click it and go. Okay, you don't have to worry about copying and pasting and all that. Okay. And then tomorrow, remember tomorrow is Family Day, so we won't be doing anything, but we will be doing Sunday school on Sunday. We'll do that via Zoom like we did last Sunday. Okay, that'll be at 9:30 tomorrow morning, or not tomorrow morning. I'm sorry, 9:30 on Sunday morning. So let's get into our devotion for this morning. Like I said, it's going to be something a little different this morning. We're going to be looking at John chapter 9. And so what's not going to happen this morning is not going to read the whole passage, because it's going to be a lot of verses. And so if I were to sit here and read the whole passage and then break them all down, it would take us all day, and you guys just don't have that kind of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit some highlights for you guys from this passage, and break them down for you guys. Okay. Let's get started. So John chapter 9, starting in verse 1, verses 1 and 2. As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And this is really interesting. The disciples see this man who was born blind. They see this man who can't see, and it's very interesting here that the disciples start off by asking Jesus like a theological type of question, where they ask him, who was it that sinned? Was it this man? Did he sin maybe in a past life, or did he sin maybe like his soul was so sinful that he was born blind, or was it that his parents sinned that that because of his parents' sin he was born blind? There are different ways that really they could have looked at this. I've always kind of thought that they like looked at it like maybe they didn't know he was born blind when they first came up to him, and they were asking out of general curiosity. There are other beliefs that that they thought that some Jews believed in the pre-existence of souls, and that possibly those pre-existent souls could sin, and so in kind of like a reincarnation type of thing. But it's really interesting that they come across this man and they ask Jesus, they say, who sinned, this man or his parents? And they ask him this theological thing, and Jesus takes it, and in verse 3 he says, verse 3 he says, "It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him." And so Jesus says it's not a theological discussion. It's not about the theology of it. It is about helping him. Jesus said that the man's blindness, which was essentially a birth defect, wasn't caused by some specific sin on the part of the man or his parents. He speaks directly to the man's situation. Jesus told them that even this man's blindness was the plan of God, so that the works of God would be revealed in him. And so he takes this theological discussion that the disciples want to have with him, and he says it's not about the knowledge behind it. It's not about what secret knowledge is behind it. It is about helping this man. It is about healing him. It is about bringing forth healing. And so we fast forward. We see that Jesus takes dirt and he spits in it. He rubs it in his hands, and he makes a mud, and he rubs the mud on the guy's eyes, and he tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. And now, what's interesting, really, with all of this, um, miracle, this whole healing, is that this is one of the first times that we actually see Jesus taking initiative in a miracle. Jesus goes to the blind man. Jesus rubs the mud on his eyes. Jesus tells him to go wash it off. This is really awesome that Jesus takes the initiative here to heal this man. We see in other times blind come to him, lame are brought to him, the sick find their ways. There's a story of a woman who has a blood disease, who says, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I know that I'll be healed. And she goes and she crawls through this crowd and she touches the hem of his robe and is healed. And so this is awesome that Jesus took the initiative, that Jesus goes and meets this guy where he was. And then you have to think, like, it took a lot of faith for the guy to trust that it would happen. It was a very faith-filled action to go and wash in this pool. The healing would not happen had the man not responded in these faith-filled, obedient actions. So we see he goes and he washes and he comes back and he sees, and the people of the town, they're like, hey, weren't you the guy that was born blind? And the other people are like, no, it's just somebody that looks like him. And he's like, no, it is me. Here's what I know. This guy came to me and he made a mud and he rubbed it on my eyes, and then he told me to go to Siloam and wash. And so I did, and now I see. And so word of this gets back to the Pharisees. And remember, the Pharisees and the Sadducees made up the Sanhedrin, which were the religious rulers of Jerusalem at this time. And so word gets back to the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were the super religious, like, you didn't want to cross them. They knew the rules, like, all that. This blind guy comes before the Pharisees. And they're like, what happened? We've heard that you were born blind. Now you can see, like, what's going on. And so the blind guy tells them what happened. He tells them the whole story. And we see that the Pharisees get divided in this. They decide, look, Jesus is not a man from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath, and this divided them. Some of them thought that they kept the Sabbath law too strict. Some of them thought that they weren't interpreting it correctly. And others were like, no, Jesus is a sinner and should be rejected. And so they asked the blind man again. They said, they asked the blind man again in verse 17. They say, so they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he has opened your eyes? He said he is a prophet. And so this is not when Jesus is like, this is still like at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, word still spreading as to who he is and everything. And so the blind man says he's a prophet. And so in verse 18 it says that the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight. So at this point it's like he got in trouble with the principal, and the principal's all like, okay, I don't believe that you didn't cheat on the test, so I'm going to call your parents. It was almost like the Pharisees kind of thought that the parents were in on this like huge conspiracy, that their son was just acting blind this whole time. And that their son was just acting blind this whole time. And this is all just part of a conspiracy to help promote Jesus and take away power from the Pharisees. So they call his parents and they say, is this your son? And was he not born blind? And they said, this is our son. He was born blind. We don't know how he sees. and they like ask the parents, and the parents say, very interestingly, in verse 20, or here I'll read verses 19 and 20, and ask them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered, we know this is our son, and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself. And John makes an interesting note that they said this because they were afraid of being put out of the synagogue. The Pharisees had already leveled a law that whoever proclaims Jesus as the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. And the synagogue was seen as their church in that time. The synagogue was seen as their church in that time and was seen as their connection to God. And so the parents were afraid of losing that connection. And so they say, he is of age, ask him. And so they ask him again, and he says in verse 25, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know that though I was blind, now I see. And so here are the things I really want to point out to you guys this morning. Jesus meets you where you are and heals you. Jesus is our connection to God. Man cannot separate us from God. No threat that man can levy can separate us from God. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to give you guys this encouragement. Guys, the gospel is our connection to God. The gospel is what connects us with God. The gospel is what lets us talk to God. And what Jesus did on the cross, that is what draws us to God. That is what connects us to God. Man cannot separate us from God. Your actions cannot separate you from God. Apart from full-on rejection of the gospel, full-on rejection of Jesus, you cannot be separated from God. And so this morning, if you're feeling separated from God, I want you to take a moment and just pray to God and say, God, draw me near to you. He will meet you where you are. I will see you guys today at 4 p.m. Have a good one.